I'm talking tonight about making a difference. I'm talking about making a difference with God. I want to make a difference with God. Maybe you do too. Maybe you're wondering what this is about. But I remember, I might have told you this before. I had a job once. Just when I finished school, I'd just turned 18, and I was going to do a little bit of traveling after this. So for a few months, I had a couple of jobs. One of them was working in a bear factory. The other one was working, I don't know how I got the job, but for my church as like the church like caretaker, handyman. Now, I never would have got the job at Pattern Church because I was useless, but I didn't for some reason let that stop me. I just plowed on. So for example, right, I had to paint the one foyer when you came into the church office. So I found some paint, slapped it on. Turned out it was masonry paint. I mean, I thought it was a bit thick, but that was fine. Another time, I had to hang like a pinboard on the wall. And I remember how my dad used to do it. He got out his big hammer drill and drilled into the wall and put in a raw plug. So I bought my hammer drill in, drilled into the wall, put in a raw plug. The only problem was that the wall was just made out of like wood. It was like a temporary, like indoor. I literally could have screwed in a screw with my finger, but that didn't stop me. I went for it. There was a pipe outside that wasn't quite dripping into the right place. Rather than get the appropriate bit, I just wrapped up a plastic wallet, sellotaped it on. Jobs are given. It gets better. There was a PA cupboard that used to be on the stage, and it wasn't opening properly because the hinges were sagging, and so it was getting caught. If you know that when the hinges sag and the door gets caught on the floor. Now, I didn't know about changing hinges, so what I did was I unhinged the door. I then lopped an angle off the bottom of the cupboard door, and then it opened beautifully, just at a wonky angle. Or my pièce de résistance, creme de la creme, as a church caretaker, was when I had to defrost a fridge, and it was taking ages. I don't know if you ever tried to defrost a fridge or a freezer full of ice, and it was taking ages to defrost. And so I think my colleague was joking. She was saying, "Oh, sometimes I use a chisel." I thought that sounds sensible enough. So I got the chisel, start chiseling away to try and just get rid of some of this ice. I chisel through the lining. Out comes this like toxic green gas. All of my colleagues are busy choking away. We have to get this thing out of the building as quick as possible so we don't poison everyone. And that just about sums up my career as a caretaker. Now, I wanted to contribute. I wanted to make a difference, but I was completely ill-equipped. And sometimes I can feel a bit like that with my faith. I want to make a difference with God. Maybe you do too. I want to make a difference to the people around me. I want to make a difference here in Swindon. I want to be someone who makes a difference. But I don't always know where to start. And in Judges, we're looking at the story of Gideon, and here's someone who made a difference. And this is one big moment in Judges chapter 7 where Gideon makes a big difference. So I'm going to read. I'll read first of all Judges chapter 7, verses 1 to 15. It says this: One day Gideon and all his men got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The Midianite camp was in the valley to the north of them by Morah Hill. The Lord said to Gideon, "The men you have are too many for me to give them the victory over the Midianites. They might think that they've won by themselves and so give me no credit. Announce to the people, anyone who's afraid should go back home, and we will stay here at Mount Gilead." So 22,000 went back, but 10,000 stayed. And the Lord said to Gideon, "You still have too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will separate them for you there. If I tell you a man should go with you, he will go. If I tell you he should not go with you, he will not go." Gideon took the men down to the water, and the Lord said to him, "Separate everyone who laps up the water with his tongue like a dog from everyone who gets down on his knees to drink." There were 300 men who scooped up the water in their hands and lapped it. All the others got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites with the 300 men who lapped up the water. Tell everyone else to go home." So Gideon sent all the Israelites home except the 300 who kept all the supplies and trumpets. The Midianite camp was below them in the valley. That night, the Lord commanded Gideon, "Get up and attack the camp. I'm giving you victory over it. But if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. You will hear what they're saying, and then you will have courage to attack." So Gideon and his servant Purah went down to the edge of the enemy camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and the desert's tribesmen were spread out in the valley like a swarm of locusts. They had as many camels as there were grains of sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, he heard a man telling his friend about a dream. He was saying, "I dreamt that a loaf of barley bread rolled down into our camp and hit a tent. The tent collapsed and lay flat on the ground." His friend replied, "It's the sword of the Israelite, Gideon, son of Joash. It can mean nothing else. God has given him victory over Midian and over our whole army." When Gideon heard about the man's dream and what it meant, he fell to his knees and worshipped the Lord. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and said, "Get up. The Lord is giving you victory over the Midianite army." Now, Gideon made a difference, but it wasn't the way you'd expect. You see, Gideon had this army, which actually 32,000 wasn't that many, against, I don't know if you heard it in that reading, they had so many camels, it looked like grains of sand on the seashore. Most likely hundreds of thousands of people in this enemy, in this enemy group. He had a tiny little number, 32,000, and God said to him, "You've got too many." I don't know about you, but often when God gives me a dream, or I have a little idea that I think is a good thing, or I think about how I want to be and with people around me, you might be thinking about how you want to be at school or the places where you are, and you think, I haven't quite got enough resources to do what I want to do, or I haven't got enough experience to do what I want to do, or I haven't got enough time to do what I want to do, or I'm not quite the right person to do what I want to do. And what this story tells us is that stuff doesn't matter. Paul, when he talked about Gideon 2 weeks ago, talked about how Gideon saw himself as the smallest person in the smallest clan, in the smallest tribe. But God said to him, "You are a mighty warrior." But our limitations don't limit God. Any one of us plus God is always a majority. And it's really easy to look at what we have and say, "I haven't got enough." But that is not a problem for God. In fact, I think sometimes I rely too much on what I've got and not enough on God. I rely too much on my experience, or like the wisdom I've gained over my many years, as Em kindly pointed out, or I lean too much on my resources or the stuff I have or my abilities, and I don't rely enough on God. Gideon had something, 32,000 men, and God said to him, "You need to cut that down." I love it. There's a verse that makes me smile every time when God says to him, "Take them down to the waters," in verse 4, "and I will separate them for you there." I'm going to help you out, Gideon, by making your army tiny. I'm going to help you out because we're going to show everyone what I can do when people rely on me. See, God loves to work with us in partnership. He loves to work with you in partnership. But you're not like the senior partner here. I'm the junior partner, and God does his stuff. And you just wonder, how would Gideon feel when his army was going from not a chance with his 32,000 people down to, this is ridiculous with 10,000, down to this is basically suicide with 300 people. But Gideon listens to God. And this is key. If you want to make a difference for God, if I want to make a difference for God, then the number one thing I do that I need to do is listen. I've got to listen. Like when I was being the handyman at the church, I really needed to listen to someone who was going to tell me how to do the things I had to do to make a difference. I didn't listen. But this is where it starts for us. We need to listen. What is God saying to you? What is God saying to you? Gideon listens even when it's daft. I mean, can you imagine being one of those 9,700 people who were up for the fight, but Gideon sent them home? Imagine them going home thinking, this is ridiculous, he's going to lose. Like, it was a daft plan that God gave to Gideon, but he went with it. He listened. He listened even when it was daft. And sometimes God's whispering daft things to you. He's saying, that neighbour who's giving you a tough time, drop him a little note, buy him a present. He's saying that colleague who is a pain in the neck, drop him an email, see how they're doing. They're saying that school friend who's always horrible to you, start praying for them and maybe think about inviting them to Youth Alpha. Daft plans start dropping into our hearts when we listen to God. How do I listen? That's a great question. Four little tips. This isn't exhaustive, but I'm going to give you 4 little W's, how to help us listen to God. Number 1 is the Word, the Bible. I'd encourage you, try and read your Bible every day. If it's a few verses, that's fine. I try and read a chapter a day, and then I take little notes. I've got a journaling Bible. What's God saying to me today? But this is a great way you hear from God. And maybe if you've got a bit of time on your hands in lockdown, a brilliant lady in our church recently read the whole Bible in 40 days, a couple of hours a day. That would be a fun way. But you don't have to do that. That's extreme. But let's dive into the Word together. Number 2, my second W, is worship. Something changes in us when we sing to God, when we worship, when we realize who He is and who we are, how great He is, how good He is, how kind He is. That seems to open things up for Him to speak to us. So I encourage you, get a bit of singing going and put some worship songs on and worship along. Number 3, third W, waiting. That we actually need to listen to God. We need to create space in our lives. Why don't we say from tomorrow, I'm going to give just 5 minutes. I'm going to put my phone down, as exciting and interesting as it is. I'm going to pause everything else. I'm just going to let God speak and just see what He says. Just see if He starts to drop thoughts, pictures, words, ideas into your head. Waiting matters. Final one little tip. Worship, words, waiting. Write it down. What's God saying? Scribble it down. And you start to have to grow a bit of a picture of what God's saying to you, the sort of things that He's just prodding you about and poking you about and inviting you into. These are parts of how we listen to God. And Gideon listened to his daft plan, and things started to change. I remember my wife and I we bought a house now quite a while ago, several years ago, 8 years ago, and the house that we bought was in a mess. We basically bought a roof, and actually we've done stuff about the roof since then, and 4 walls, which also leak. But we did everything to that house. If you ever watched like Homes Under the Hammer, we did the whole lot. Plastered the walls, new carpets, new tiles, new kitchen, new bathrooms, new heating, new electrics, new everything. We did everything to make this house the house we were going to live in for years and years and years. And it took us months and months to do it. We moved in, and then we felt God saying, actually, for my vicar school, I should go to Cambridge. And so after 6 months in our beautiful house, which we had, and friends of ours had come and painted and sweated over and cried over, off we went. It was a daft plan, but we don't regret it for a moment, because it opened up so many wonderful things that God's done in our lives. We listened and we went. And I heard about a bunch of school kids that they were a youth group of a friend of mine, and they just started serving their school by cleaning football boots. And as they cleaned football boots, something started to change for them. And the headmaster said to my friend who was a youth worker, these children have changed the school. Things shifted because they listened to God's daft plans. So am I listening, even if the plan seems daft? You see, because what we don't know is the things that God knows. That God knows everything, and God can change people's hearts. I love this little bit of the story in verse 13 and 14. It says, when Gideon arrived at the camp, he heard a man telling his friend about a dream, and then he heard a dream that a loaf of bread was rolling down a hill and squashing a tent. What a ridiculous dream! But then his friend says in verse 14, it's the sword of the Israelite, Gideon, son of Joash. It can't mean anything else. Obviously, that's what the bread rolling down the hill means. God's given victory over Midian and our whole army. You see, God was changing the hearts of the enemies. God was changing the hearts of people. And so that's what God does. We can't change people's hearts, but God does. And then when you invite your friend to come and explore Alpha, who you think will always say no, maybe God's been working on their heart. Or when you start to speak to someone about the change in you, and you think they're not going to listen, or maybe God has been changing their heart. Or when God's given you a vision and it requires someone else to say yes to it, and you think they're never going to say yes, well, God can change hearts. So the plan might not seem as daft. And once Gideon had heard what God was saying to the Midianites, the plan no longer seemed so daft. Because God knows things that we don't, which is why you and me, if we're going to make a difference for God, need to be listening to God. It starts with listening and then going. Verse 19, it says this, bring the words up. It says, Gideon and his 100 men came to the edge of the camp a short while before midnight, just after the guard had been changed. Then they blew their trumpets and broke their jars that they were holding. And the other two groups did the same. They all held the torches in their hands, the trumpets in their right, and shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Every man stood in his place around the camp, and the whole enemy ran away yelling. While Gideon's men were blowing their trumpets, the Lord made the enemy troops attack each other with their swords. They ran towards Zarathan as far as Beth-shittah and as far as the towns of Abel-meholah near Tabath. So, huge army, bigger than the sand on the sea. Gideon and his men got a trumpet and a torch, 300 of them. They blow it, and the enemies run away and turn on each other. Gideon made a difference because he listened and he went. And you and me can make a difference if we listen and we go. There's no point going without listening because we make a big old mess. There's no point listening without going because we just hear stuff and don't do it. If you want to make a difference for God, if I want to make a difference for God, then we need to be like Gideon and we need to listen and go. Listen and go. Question number 1, what's God saying to me? Question number 2, am I doing it? Listen and obey. If I want to make a difference, if I want to make Swindon a bit more like heaven, if I want to walk in partnership with God into my school, into my place of work, into my family, into my town, into this planet, here's the key. Listen and go. Listen and go. And God is looking for people who will do just that, who will listen and go, even in lockdown. I know that there are many limitations on us right now, that life is tricky in many, many ways, and for some people, painful and scary. And lots of options have been closed to us while we're in lockdown, but lots of different options are open. What's God inviting you to do in this season? You know, maybe you've got a bit more time and God's saying, why don't you push into prayer or push into the Bible or grow in that area? Or maybe there's something you're going to volunteer with. Or maybe there's some people in your life who you can reach out to where they might not be able to normally, but in lockdown you can do that. And I know some of you are musicians and singers and songwriters, or maybe lockdown is a season to be writing those songs. That's going to do something. Maybe we've got artists and writers. What are you doing with this time? Are you partnering with God to make wonderful things? Are you listening and going, even though we are limited? Am I listening And am I going? What's God saying to you? We've got a big old vision here at Pattern Church, inviting people into family to serve Swindon. There's 200,000 people in our town who don't know Jesus, who don't know faith in their lives, and we want to play our part in seeing Swindon come alive. So we're dreaming of 1,000 baptisms. We're dreaming of an army of young people running after Jesus, full of joy and passion and purpose and vision. We're dreaming of being a church who makes a difference to some of the social issues in our town. We're dreaming of being a church who plant churches. We're dreaming of playing our part in seeing Swindon come alive. But guess what we're going to need to do if we're going to see that happen? We're going to need to listen, and we're going to need to go. Listen and go. What's God saying to you right now? What's he saying to you? Are you listening? Are you going? That's fine. What's he saying? Are you listening and going? There's a key verse in the chapter before that says this. It says the Spirit of God fell upon Gideon. And that's the other element. We need to be filled with the Spirit, and we need to listen, and we need to go. Imagine if we didn't look at our many limitations, and I've got loads. You may be able to list yours too. We didn't need to list the reasons that we're not qualified, or the reasons we can't make a difference, or the resources or stuff we haven't got at our disposal. What if we came to God, knowing that he has purpose for our lives, knowing that he's given us gifts and skills and unique personalities to make a difference? Imagine if we came to God and we listened, saying, God, what do you want me to do? And imagine if we did it. Imagine the new sense of partnership with God. Imagine the new closeness. Imagine the new fire and vibrancy in our relationship with God. Imagine the new purpose we would live with. And imagine the adventures we would have with God as we see armies flee before us when we blow our trumpets and smash our torches. God wants you to be a difference maker. He wants you to be an impact haver. He wants you to partner with him to make the place you are, Swindon or wherever you are, more like heaven. You are qualified. You are called. You are enough. Listen and go. Listen and go.